So you want to get out of the consulting side, but backing up, like how does one work their way into the industry to be a consultant for all this stuff?
That's a great question. So
it seems a pretty niche thing to do.
It is, and it's really hidden. For the most part, a lot of it is under NDA, so like I can't talk about it or post about it unless we get like express approval. So sometimes what will happen. Well, let me back up before I go down that road. But so I had GMR fab shops. Gosh, those were early 2000s. I closed our final, stopped building, quote unquote, in 2010-11 range. And when I stopped that, I had like over a year waiting list for builds. I just started making these long format videos where basically I am just going through in detail like all these aspects of design from start to finish. And so that was more just for fun, just because I can. And simply because like no one's really done anything like that or has started that. Like a lot of guys that are my peers per se try to keep a lot of that too close to the hip, in my opinion, or like they don't want to tell people. So instead of guys being able to learn from someone that's older, like I never had anyone really to learn from, because it's kind of like the school of hard knocks. It's more like you get made fun of and then you learn what not to fucking do, and then you adjust, as opposed to someone legitimately sitting down and being like, okay, here are like the standardization of constraints that are considered like good, and then you can be inside of that sort of metric, and then you could argue where in that metric is better, but here are like the standardized metrics of like camber caster curves and inclination and Ackerman stuff and all these dynamics that no one really follows or no one really talks about, but at least I'm giving some really good standardization or like metrics so that guys can start their process and learn from. And so I just started making these videos like almost a year ago just to do that, just kind of fucking around. And so, like I was saying, each one's like 2 hours. Some of them are over 2 hours. And so far there's 10 episodes on that specific YouTube channel. And I still have more to go on that. So it's going to be like a year till I even get through the outlines that I have at my rate of like one video every few months or one video every few weeks. But that was just something
they're just around. Organic start to finish videos.
Just straight up, yeah. I created an outline that in theory I tried to start with very basic concepts and then move forward into more advanced concepts as far as design work goes. Because I've spent 20 years either building or designing stuff. So like I originally was building back in like the Desert Rangers days, Desert Rides days. My fab shop was GMR. So I had both an off-road fab shop and a hot rod / pro touring style fab shop. And so I come from like the school of hard knocks, like the original DR days where you would post pictures up, etc. And like you were either mocked into the fucking ground or you were like pseudo praised, right? And so it's basically just a bunch of shit talk and everyone being dicks. Do you know what I'm referring to, like DR, Desert Rangers? Mm-hmm. Okay, so obviously like doesn't even exist anymore. Like Instagram and all the other stuff has just completely deteriorated all of the forums. Yeah. I mean, Race Desert is still around a little bit, but like no one's really following Race Desert per se, No. So that whole concept of the forum mentality of posting up your builds, your progress, and then either getting shit talked on or learning, that has all changed and morphed into like this social media atmosphere. So
yeah, I feel like the forums are still alive with like the older generation. They're still
Exactly. And I'm older now as far as our industry is concerned, yet there's still a lot of guys older than me per se, but there's still a ton of like young guys, way younger than me, that when I was starting out, there was no one talking about what I'm talking about. And there were a few guys on the forums that occasionally would give advice, but for the most part, anyone that really knew what they were talking about, all they really were doing was just shit posting or shit talking other guys until they like figured it out on their own that like, oh, I fucked that up. I got to redo this, And so there was no one really like kind of laying out some sort of blanket standardization that like, here are good ways to start doing this or design in this fashion or whatever you want to call it, right? Like, so that's why I started just doing that. And it kind of ruffled some feathers. I had a few of my peers being like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you're kind of giving it away. Like we don't want everyone to know like this. We want everyone kind of learn the school of hard knocks, or, don't be giving away like the secret sauce, or don't be making it too easy for people per se.
But
right?
it's just education. I mean,
Straight up, yeah. And it's super fucking boring. Like you'd have to be into design or whatever to even like any of those videos per se. And that's just one specific avenue. Like, you know, if you're a normal guy in the industry per se, or a fan or a racer, like it's already kind of way past what you're doing. It's really geared towards the guys that want to design their own stuff and haven't really found a good source of information that kind of breaks a lot of this stuff down and then helps, or hopefully helps, guys like get past a lot of the initial hurdles so that they don't make the same mistakes I made over the course of like 20 years figuring out what works and what doesn't work through, in essence, the school of hard knocks, because there's no like standardization or no like guy that's kind of saying, hey, here's a great way of doing it. And everyone wants to keep it a secret to some degree. And so I also kind of have like a sneaking suspicion that a lot of guys, even some other designers, etc., like they don't even know half the stuff I'm talking about. And so by default, the reason they want to keep it a secret or whatever is because like they don't want to be like kind of disclosed that they don't know what they're doing, if that makes sense. Yeah. You see what I'm getting at? Mm-hmm. So it's just a weird dynamic. And so that's why I started doing that. But between that and the DIY off-road stuff, that whole sort of weird dynamic has shifted.
So what is DIY off-road?
DIY off-road is a digital asset marketplace for our industry. So it's technically the first one of our industry, although I'm not technically the first one to sell digital assets. There were some guys selling digital assets before me. So that'd be like Craig Hall, etc., and Matt as well. And so what I just created is a marketplace to sell digital assets, where designers like myself can go on and list digital assets for sale. So that would be a non-proprietary digital asset that could be a widget or a bracket or anything in general, whether it's a suspension kit. I have full chassis on there. You can do tabs, etc. But the point being is, if I draw something like a battery box for an Optima or a link arm or just something generic for off-road, right? In essence, if I'm the file creator per se, I own, or the proprietary information of that is owned by me, as opposed to I also have a consulting firm where I design for builders, race teams, etc. So if we're designing in an NDA fashion or designing a component, whether it's a race chassis or part for a builder, they own that proprietary information. So the deviation here and where I'm going with this is DIY off-road caters to non-proprietary component digital asset sales. So if I'm selling front end arms or spring hangers or whatever you want to call it on DIY off-road, these are non-proprietary files. In other words, you can purchase the file, the cut file, because basically we sell digital assets. So that is cut files or CAD files. Some stuff on there is scan files or scan data. So you can purchase that file and you can make one spring hanger or 100 spring hangers, have them all cut out, whatever the fuck, it doesn't matter. The point being is it's non-proprietary. So Joe can purchase that same spring hanger, cut it out, and make it for his truck, while Tom in a different state can purchase the same spring hanger file, make that, etc. So it's not locked to a specific individual or company. Whereas if we're designing a proprietary component, well, obviously that proprietary data information is going to be locked to said individual, said race team, said builder, said manufacturer. So DIY Off-Road opens up for designers, like Weekend Warriors or other individuals. So we have like 12 or 14 designers on the site now that sell files other than myself. I've got 2,800 or 2,900 files now on the site, and I'm constantly adding stuff, and so are designers. But they can then go on and list stuff for sale. So say I built my own, Bronco 2, and I have drop brackets for the beams and spring hangers and maybe a shock mount, and I did all that myself, drew it all in my own CAD program, but it was for my own truck, right? And so then I can go on to DIY Off-Road, I can list those for sale so other Bronco owners can purchase and cut those out or send them to have cut out, however you want to call it, right? So you're basically able to sell the digital assets. So you're not selling a physical part, you're selling the not necessarily the idea, you're selling the file so that someone
they
can
would just buy the file, go take it to a machine shop, and they can cut it out.
However, whatever it is, whether it's a machine part, a laser part, like chassis, etc. Like in essence, they'd be sending like Cal West a pack that would have DXFs for flat cutting, or if it's tube structure, it would have the appropriate step files and cut list for cutting and bending the tube structure. and they would in essence buy that and then have that cut and build it themselves. So it's really fundamentally, it's like really all the way back to like a true do-it-yourself, because like you're not just buying like a weld-it-yourself kit, you're going even a step further back in that. But the marketplace itself is geared towards anybody that is designing parts can sell them on the platform, as opposed to like just me selling them. If that makes sense.
Yeah. How's the success with DIY like in this off-road industry?
We're 3 years into it, and I really don't want to disclose that.
Yeah, no, I mean not like number-wise, but like for you,
I'm not going to stop doing it.
Yeah.
That's all I want to say. It's been a lot better than I thought it would be, but I would prefer no one compete with me. So I'd rather keep it like kind of on the DL per se. But it's
understandable.
It's growing, and we have DIY muscle car that is going to be launched soon too. Same type of platform. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things that we are almost. Let's see. By January, we will be on year 4, if I remember correctly. I'm very busy, so it's hard to remember if we're year 3 or 4. I'm pretty sure it'll be year 4. And so some of the stuff that's on that site, the initial like link arms and some of the other stuff, I mean, some of them have been like 11 or 1,200 purchases of the same file. So some of the stuff really racks up over time. So we've got some designers on the site that, again, this is like side income, that they're putting in stuff, and they're getting paid out like $500, $2,000, $3,000 a month. It varies, right? Because it's never like a perfect, like a linear sort of line. It's really just up and down, and like there's no real consensus as to like what sells more and less, because like 1 month you'll have like all this other stuff, and the next month it'll be totally different stuff. You see what I'm saying? It's really weird.
I think it's the industry in general. Like we'll have a month that UTV parts do extremely well, and then it'll drop off, and truck parts will go up, and it kind of goes all over the place.
Yeah, and I don't really manage that, so like I'm not good with that. My wife does all the management of DIY on the backside. So she handles. So she sees the actual numbers. I don't. I see orders come through because I'm on the primary account that sees all that stuff come through. But she's the one that does all the payouts. She handles all the hard, because we do have hard part sales where it'll be like matching componentry of bearings, etc., that do match the digital assets to some degree. So she'll make sure those get printed out so those can get packaged up. But I'd have to ask her like what the numbers are. I've been so hands off on that side. I pretty much only focus on the engineering for actually all 3 of the businesses.
It's kind of nice though to not have to stress about that whole backside of it.
Yeah, my wife is like, her background is accounting and running businesses, so
it's perfect. She
handles all the backside of the consulting firm stuff between billing and accounting, and even like the race team stuff, like the ordering of parts, ordering of things, setting up accounts. I pretty much only focus on management and engineering side. So like I am not the person to ask on the numbers. I know the numbers are good with DIY off-road, and my goal here is to phase out consulting, because I'd still do a lot of design consulting for race teams, builders, manufacturers, but I'm more or less retiring from that by the end of this year, and then focusing only on building race vehicles, selling race vehicles, and DIY platforms, which would be off-road and muscle car.
So you want to get out of the consulting side, but backing up, like how does one work their way into the industry to be a consultant for all this stuff?
That's a great question. So
it seems pretty a pretty niche thing to do.
It is, and it's really hidden. For the most part, a lot of it is under NDA, so like I can't talk about it or post about it unless we get like express approval. So sometimes what will happen. Well, let me back up before I go down that road. But so I had GMR fab shops. Gosh, those were early 2000s. I closed stopped building, quote unquote, in 2010-11 range. And when I stopped that, I had like over a year waiting list for builds. And I just got burned out. Like I was fucking overdoing the physical side of it. So I had left that side of the industry, and then did my best to like not do shit, kind of leave the industry as a whole, because at that point I was so burned out with how like shitty a lot of the people in the industry are sometimes, and a lot of people owed me money and stuff, and just kind of was burned out on that. in that sort of range, 2010, 11. Then moved to Arizona to do manufacturing for Pro Touring driveline components, and then got burned out on that. But that was more of a miss on my part. We went way too extreme with like the ballerness of everything we were doing. So we kind of alienated ourselves into a really bad position. We made stuff almost too nice for the industry, unfortunately. And so that led to a real headache. So then that fizzled out. And then I ended up, after that, coming back to California. I had a steam boiler company that was pretty successful for a while, where we did servicing steam boilers. Had contracts with all the major like gym facility stuff, like all the Equinox locations in all Southern California, blah, blah. And so did that for years. And while I was doing that, and this is like 2012, 13, 14 range, 15, 16. In like 2012 range, I'd already left the off-road industry like a year and a half before. And I just kept getting people that were asking me to design this, design that. You know, basically peers or buddies of mine that had fab shops, had a business, right? Or they were trying to start something. Like, remember UTVs were just kind of coming to the table. So you had like everyone starting to do arm kits and shit like that, right? And so back then, the process was different than it is now, but you had to kind of hand rough in R&D and, you know, work through design and developing. And there weren't so many CAD guys. You know, you're talking 2011, 12. There were a few guys on CAD. And so at that point, I just kept having people ask me, like, do this, do that. And so I just, like, under the radar, so to speak, was just drawing tons of stuff for all these guys in our industry, some of whom have gone out of business by now. A lot are still in business and still doing stuff, whether it's long travel stuff for truck-based side or UTV side, which was, you know, like I was saying, just now starting to take off. So by like 2014, 15, I was drawing tons of UTV arms, and stuff that catered to sort of that side of the industry. And back then it was like, you know, like the Cheese Dick 1000 razors and stuff like that. So it was like very minimal compared to where it is now, where you've got just a plethora of models. And then doing like long travel kits, some race chassis stuff too. And then I had people from different countries. So like in that time period, I had experimented with digital asset sales in 2012-13 range, and I wrote a book on welding that I sold as a digital asset on Amazon. And through that book, I started getting people from 2014, 15, 16 all over the world, from Europe, China, New Zealand, Australia, stuff like that.
Had you ever written a book before this?
No, that was just me dicking around because I was fascinated by
randomly wrote a book.
Well, it's a digital book. It's still on Amazon today, and for a while it was one of the Amazon bestsellers. And so it's a digital asset book. So in other words, you're buying like a PDF, right?
Yeah. And
I just wanted to learn how like Amazon was doing it, et cetera. And then that book ended up doing really well. And I kind of just sat on that idea to some degree for a while simultaneously just kept drawing tons of my own stuff on the side. And like over years and years and years, just kind of had this database of like thousands of parts, whether it's from like housings to link arms to just shit that I drew, right? So it doesn't belong to anyone, it belonged to me.
So on the design part, were you like scanning stuff to design off of, or is this all like...
Back then, no. We didn't really have access to like good scanning equipment. Like I didn't get...
So what was the process of, like now I watch them do it in here, you know, they just scan
basically like a UTV arm, I would have like a really nice desk layout set up with like perfect 90-degree measurement tools and stuff like that, to where you could capture to some degree, you know, the pickup points, and then you'd rough that in the computer. And then we would always like laser cut a mock-up one, right? And check that and then make adjustments. And it always went through like multiple reps.
Yeah.
It was never perfect right off the bat. So if like you're doing an arm for like a UTV or like a Silverado, although to be fair, like the Silverado and the GM based stuff, or Ford, we were getting OEM files. So it was really the UTV stuff where I couldn't get OEM files, that like you're having to do it like the hand way. So you'd probably go through 2 or 3 like real cheese dick laser cut arms to make sure it cycles all great and bitchin', right? And then once you're set, you can do all the final design, but it would take some effort.
So the R&D process was a lot longer than what...
Yes, it was a pain in the dick. It was totally, and it would cost way more. It would cost 3 times the cost to do like a normal UTV arm is today. Like scan it, rough it in, double check it. You're maybe 1 rev, maybe 2 revs, and you're off to the races.
Yeah.
You know, it's totally different and significantly faster and more accurate. But you know, the scanning stuff didn't really come into prevalence until... I think we bought our stuff in, now I'm trying to remember, late 17 range, early 18. Now, I wasn't the first to start scanning stuff. A few of my other peers did. But at that point, I had more or less phased out the steam boiler business because I was over that. And I had made enough money to where I was just kind of chilling. I bought a restaurant and a catering operation that I basically gifted to my mom. And then that was running for a few years, Hardcore Barbecue. And then at that point...
Is that still a thing?
No. We got flooded out on that one. That ended up getting flooded by an upstairs tenant and spent the better part of 2 years into litigation. And we never got a resolve, which it wouldn't have mattered. COVID would have fucking annihilated us on the business. Oh, fuck yeah. COVID annihilated a lot of businesses in California that were restaurant catering based. And so it is what it is, but that's roughly in like 2018-19 range. But at that point in time, like that 16-17 range, I kind of started my firm, right? Where it wasn't just me designing stuff. I had other individuals that either I was paying to design stuff or working with me at the firm. And at that point, it was tech consulting. And so we were taking on far more clients. And so that roster just fucking grew. And I think on the high side, I had 4 of us drawing stuff full time for a lot of stuff. Whether it's UTV cages, the UTV stuff is just so fucking popular during that time frame. I mean, it still is, but during that chunk,
it's so hard right now with how it's a washed up industry. There's a lot of it out there, and I think Amazon really like almost hurt the UTV industry,
Yeah, but at the same time, the manufacturers keep it going because, like Polaris, for example, they fucking change the model like every year and a half, 2 years. I mean, CanAm, that X3 chassis, other than a few changes, has been the same from 18 through 2022. Whereas Polaris, I mean, they're changing stuff constantly. I mean, even
they just came out with the new XP1000.
There you go.
Another one.
Basically, what's happening is they're like ensuring that this sort of like R&D fuckery is just a consistent battle.
Yeah.
Like there's no real like, hey, we're done, we're manufacturing. It's like, well, shit, now we got to jump to this one. Which isn't necessarily a bad thing because it does give a lot of variety to the end consumer, but it's definitely different than some of the other manufacturers. Like, Honda for the most part has like a few revs, but everything's more or less the same. The CanAms more or less have been the same for that X3 type platform. And then Polaris just does all this weird fuckery. Like I remember when they changed the Turbo S stuff in the middle of a manufacturing year, didn't say anything, and all of a sudden none of the upper arms fit because they changed the width of the upper arms by 9 millimeters or 10 millimeters.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's just normal for Polaris.
Yeah, I know for Can-Ams, when we go to like Placer City and do the races out there, you hear it a lot. Like people are just waiting on Can-Am to do something different than the X3,
I've seen some stuff.
I know they're in the works, but
they've been showing a few people here or there because we still, up until more recently, I was very ingrained with like a lot of the, I don't know how you'd say it, like serious racers, factory racers, or whatever the fuck you want to call it.
On the UTV side?
Yeah, a lot. We've designed for a lot of those guys. Most of that's under NDA. Some of it's not. Some of it, if it's on my Instagram, we're allowed to show it on that JEH Consulting Instagram. If it's not, which it's fine, because like in that consulting sort of dynamic, like we're paid to like keep our mouth shut to some degree. But you'd be surprised like how there really is like a handful of guys like myself that kind of design a lot of stuff for a lot of the main things. Like there really isn't a ton of dudes that are doing this. So it's kind of like a small subset of guys, and some of them like they just keep super under the radar. Like they don't say shit, they don't post anything, and I get that because if you're under NDA and stuff, you don't want to ruffle feathers, you don't want to piss people off because you know some of these guys they don't want the end consumer to know that like they're not actually designing all their own stuff. I mean, I get that mentality. It seems weird to me.
I mean, it's like anything in life. Everybody's outsourcing everything,
Yeah, and like the other side of that table too is like, if you're really using quote unquote industry inside experts, etc., like you in theory would want the end consumer to know that, as opposed to the reality of the situation, which is all of these manufacturers, like there's no fucking way they're all experts.
Yeah.
So by default, like percentages, like there's no way. So some of them have to just be complete morons that are designing stuff. But instead of like trying to let that be like the vision for the end consumer, they could be like, yeah, we outsource to individuals that really do this on a daily basis. and then we can move forward. It makes our stuff faster. But again, like I'm saying, I'm kind of out of that, so like that's why I don't really care. But I would never break like the NDA stuff that we've had before. It's just my focus these days has been transitioning outside of that. So we got a few guys where I have stuff trickling, full builds and things like that I'll finish out this year. But for a good chunk, dude, from like mid 17 up until pretty much last year, my firm was designing stuff for so many people in the industry, from especially UTV assembly because of the money that's in that. And then you had like the race side of stuff and some long travel bits and things like that. And then we did OEM projects for big SEMA type events and things like that. Those are usually the ones that are like under the most NDA protection. That like, you know, again, the OEMs really dislike having other people do design work that ends up in their booths. It's a weird dynamic. But yeah, like I'm saying, it's something that is very weird and niche and like just kind of happened in the fact that I just had more people calling me to have shit done. And so that snowball effect of like, I can only do so much in a week. You know, it's a consulting on the design aspect literally boils down to how many hours you can shred a day. If I've got other guys that work with me that I'm more or less managing, well, then now that bandwidth just increased, you know? And so you can take on more clients, etc. Even though in essence, what we're doing is very similar, because like how many cages can you design for a Polaris that's not the fucking same?
Yeah.
Like, you know, and I've lost count on some of those aspects. My wife might be able to give you better count, but like just on like cages. Oh God, we've designed hundreds of cages for different manufacturers. Maybe like way past 200. I mean, like I'm saying, my wife would
and
know
all
more.
different designs.
Yeah. We don't do the whole like this, you know, do this. We always force clients to have to do something different so that there's no like copies. Now there is some standardization when it comes to like safety aspects and things like that. And we've had to have some people where we basically had to tell clients like in the past, like to more or less fuck off, because like they want stuff that's like just glaringly unsafe. And it's like, we're not going to do that. And so occasionally we run into that too, but typically we don't see that with the guys that are more pertaining to desert side or they're more in tune. Typically we're getting stuff like that from like the clients that are more like back east. Like,
I was just going to ask about back east. So they're a completely different style of
holy shit
clients.
Yeah. So we've
like they like their roofs like right here, you know?
Yeah, a lot of different weird shit too. And then like we also did a ton of stuff in like the diesel industry. And like that's a great example because like when you're designing things like bumpers for diesels or stuff like that, like some of the stuff we did is like, holy fuck, like, this stuff I would never buy. Yeah. It's just so gnarly. But these guys back east, like we had this one, I don't want to say his name, but their facilities in Georgia, and he sold these bumpers, hundreds of them a month. And they were like the gayest things ever. Like, I was like, what the fuck? Like, and one time he asked me like, well, what do you think? I'm like, dude, I am not your target client, but we'll fucking design them. Like, yeah. There's no fucking way I'd buy this. But there's these big monstrosity things. And like, even he like laughed about it because he was more of like he knew the desert stuff. And I think he had like some toys, and he knew what's up. He's like, well, fuck, dude, like this is the style these guys want. We powder coat them. Like, you're not going to hurt anybody. They're just big, gnarly looking, weird looking bumpers. Yeah. And so there's a perfect example of something that's like not my flavor, but like we would still get it done because we would shred through stuff like that for him. And, you know, and part of me also thinks that like he was like kind of in on the joke. Like he knew like what was up to. And we dealt with a bunch of guys like that too, that, hey, if this is what these guys want, like we're going to sell it to them, you know, as long as it doesn't cross like that weird safety barrier or make anything that's unsafe. It's like, well, why the fuck not, dude? Yeah,
I think it depends on the consumers. Like we were just doing Razor, CanAm, and a couple of YXZ things for the longest time. And now we have that Honda Talon in there because we've had
venturing in Honda stuff.
We've had a ton of people asking about cages. Like a guy last week, he had to go to Colorado to get a custom cage made. And he's like, I would have rather just paid you guys to do it.
Yeah, Honda's far more niche. There's about 4 or 5 primary players in the Honda game. You've got J Sport, which is Proctor, and you've always got Raceco, which is Jamie Campbell. And they for the most part have dominated the Honda stuff. And so I do have a lot of experience in the Honda stuff from when it first came out. I just haven't touched Honda. I haven't touched UTV stuff in like almost 2 seasons, a season or so. But you know, for a while there, that was one of those deals where the Honda guys, like, they're fucking diehards. If you ride red, like, you're gonna sell your fucking Polaris.
You ride red till you die.
Yes, you sell your Polaris or your CanAm, and then you go buy a Honda.
Yeah.
That is, like, I have friends that have literally done that, where they just, like, poo-pooed all of the previous UTVs they got and just went and got a Honda. Because, obviously, Honda's newer. Like, they didn't really have anything before. And then the other thing that they capitalize on big time, and we've helped clients in the past with this too, is kind of generate what would be considered like the age grouper clientele. So there's going to be guys that are 45 years old plus, typically married with kids, typically speaking, are going to be not really performance orientated. They're going to be more like hunting or more what would be like Overlander-esque type stuff. And the Honda dudes, like that 4-seat Honda stock, like pretty much capitalized on a lot of those guys.
Yeah.
The gearbox deal they did, some of the other bits that are far more catering to, like I'm saying, it's like 45 years old to 65-year-old range type of stuff. So we had clients during that time period. Like
my dad's looking at a CanAm Commander right now.
Okay, yeah. See, it's the similar mentality.
He bought a property in Maine, and he's like, I want to get a UTV, and he knows nothing about it.
Yeah.
And so he was looking at like Kubotas and like random like rancher style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He came over the other day, and he's like, check this thing out. It was the Commander. They're pretty cool looking. I mean,
yeah, it's just a different client.
Yeah.
It's like the same dude isn't looking at that. That's like then going to be like, well, it doesn't handle like an X3. Like, of course not. It's two different fucking things. Like,
it's half a truck, you know?
Yeah, not saying that the Hondas do have a lot of benefits performance wise, like on variations of the 2-seaters, but like that 4-seater they did definitely capitalize on that other side of the market that like dips their foot into some performance.
Yeah.
But like it's funny because I have so many friends' dads that went and bought the Hondas, and all my friends will have like everything else, from X3s to Arctic Cats to Polarises to even the Kawasaki's, which I like those too. And then all of my friends' dads all went and bought Hondas. Well, they also fucking grew up when they were younger riding Hondas.
ATCs, like.
So as soon as Honda came out with the UTV, I was like, oh yeah, we're buying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that ride red mentality.
They definitely have a good reputation in the off-road industry.
Loyal, they are brand loyal like a motherfucker. Yeah, like those dudes. That Honda capitalized on that. And same with like their support structure too. Like I know Proctor does really well with them. And I haven't talked to him for a while, but I know he was still pushing and building out that race program into multiple series, etc. And Honda was still backing him. And I think they just announced they're doing more like short course stuff too. So like clearly Honda is pushing to not necessarily to go away from what I'm referring to into more performance based, but maybe to kind of change the mentality of like maybe the guys my age and below that they're all more performance based.
Yeah.
Yeah. But again, that's a great example of of a manufacturer that legitimately can have multiple sides of the table and then capitalize on that, even though they're technically like considered tiny in the UTV game. Yeah.
So you say almost 2 seasons, right? You've been out of the UTV side.
For the most part, I still have a few guys I dabble with UTV wise, but I've just been so busy on my race program that I've pulled back a lot from that. And then the DIY off-road type stuff, it consumes a lot of time. So there's only so much bandwidth I have. So as far as like designing UTVs ground up, I haven't done a UTV ground up chassis for almost 2 seasons. Whereas like I have dabbled with some cages, some long travel kits and things like that, but I've been far more selective simply because my bandwidth is significantly deteriorated from when we were more or less like shredding full time on just client work. So now I've got my own race program that I'm doing and building now. So I build unlimited class vehicles. So that obviously consumes a lot of my time. Most of my Monday through Friday, 5:30 a.m., 6 a.m. to like 2 p.m. is on that now. And that's only been like, I'm only 8 months into
your
that.
race program, what does that entail for you? Like,
well, we are building unlimited class vehicles. So both all-wheel drive trophy truck, all-wheel drive class 1, sister platforms. Our intention initially was we were building all of these for the Towers family right now out of Australia. And so they have a race program. They have been racing for a long time. I designed all their new rear-wheel drive platforms in 2017-ish range, 2018-ish range. I mean, I have to look, but somewhere in that range.
This is a full truck design?
There's more than that. There's about let me do the math. 1, 2. There's 6 platforms total. So you have multiple rear-wheel drive platforms, which are being built at the race facility in Australia. Then the decision was made about 9 months ago that they convinced me to more or less open up a facility here where I am managing all of the construction of all the new platforms. So here in the States, we're building all-wheel drive trophy trucks, the matching pre-runners, and the all-wheel drive Class 1s. All the rear-wheel drive platforms are currently being built in Australia. They're a lot less complex and a lot less that can go wrong as far as a new platform goes. So the big boy all-wheel drive stuff in the Unlimited class, our specific goal per se or direction is to come in and be competitive with the Masons. And that's really it. Because frankly, like if you're following any of the stuff, Mason more or less is the primary competitor right now. So, and that's just how the numbers are playing out. So if you look at race results, etc., that's just where it's going. So ours is our truck is a mid-engine, full tilt trophy truck, designed and budgeted appropriately to compete with a Mason. The Class 1s are different. So the other Class 1 that's all-wheel drive that would be competitive would be the Lumacraft, and that's going to be a non-portal rear engine, traditional trailing arm car. Ours are multi-link rear arm cars, still rear engine, all-wheel drive, portal cars. They're sister platforms to the truck, so then the front ends are basically the same. But the whole goal here is my goal here is to compete as a builder against the top level Unlimited class guys. And that is why I stepped back into quote-unquote building. Now, perfect transparency, I physically don't do anything. I've got guys that work for me. So like my days of physically welding or building are kind of behind me. I'm more or less...
Which is growth. I mean, I think that is necessary.
Yeah. Plus my eyes are horrible. So just being able to weld like consistently, like it's not good. My hands are fucked up like from holding grinders and shit. Because back when I was doing it, I was more or less tube notching everything by hand. So like holding a 4-inch grinder for fucking 4 hours, 5 hours a day, like it's like I already have not great, issues with pain and stuff. So like going back to doing fabrication is just not in the cards for me. So I pretty much just run all the design development and management of the operation. And so we're getting there slowly. This is a long road. We started building the physical vehicles. And you can see this on my Instagram, the JEH Consulting Inc. Instagram. I've been posting updates. So the first Class 1 and trophy truck, first Class 1 will be done testing by Christmas time. We're hoping for October, like Halloween, maybe Christmas, somewhere in that range. The trophy truck will be right after that. So that'll be January, February, March range to have testing. So realistically, the truck will have its first full season in like 2025 for the first trophy truck. And the Class 1 will have a decent chunk in 2024, maybe a full season 2024, maybe, and then 2025. But like we're not putting dates on anything. Everything we do is to be as quality orientated as we can. So like we're not cutting corners or trying to reel time back to get it out by a certain race, So everything right now falls under the Towers family banner. So everything that's done, our entire race shop, everything is all right now specifically dedicated just for vehicles for the Towers family. I've got 3 Class 1 chassis there, 1 Return King right now. I've got the trophy truck that just came off the table. That's going to treating shortly. Then that one will be turnkeyed right after the first car. And I have the same thing as the trophy truck, which is a crew cab luxury pre-runner, all-wheel drive, same thing, mid-engine. And so these are all excess of $1 million vehicles is what the reality is for the game that we're playing. So whether you go to Mason, et cetera, like these are all excess of $1 million platforms. And so with that said, we're taking our time. We're making sure everything is done properly. We've got a lot of the proper stuff on the platforms. And nothing happens overnight. So that's why I'm kind of giving out these sort of rough, long timelines, even though, sure, we could probably, if we were doing like a 6100 and rushing and putting it together, like we could build something like that relatively quickly. But on these newer all-wheel drive platforms with a lot of brand new stuff in them, it really does create a situation where I feel comfortable taking our time, getting test miles in and things like that. So that would be like my builder side, which is for obvious reasons, that's deteriorated my bandwidth to be able to take on client stuff. That's why I've backed off a lot of that. In fact, it's kind of like a weird dynamic in that there's other guys that are friends of mine that have made transitions from being fab guys to design guys, and I've actually like kind of helped them get into like the design consulting game because they're getting older. They can't do the fab like they used to. You know, the hardcore fab, so to speak, there's a lifespan to an individual doing that. It's rough on your body, you know, it's rough on your eyes, your hands, your knees, stuff like that, to where you only have so many years you can legitimately do that until like you're just kind of, you know, you're in pain, you're hating life. So if you can transition out of that into design work, like that's a huge benefit.
I think a lot of guys don't know. Like if you, I did construction for 16 years. Yeah. So same thing. Guys get stuck in that rut, as you will, and like getting out of that into like a computer job it doesn't even seem reality, you know.
It's rough
to be able to transition and move on to something like this. I think it's rad.
Yeah, and I've pushed several guys to do that because I can see the writing on the wall, just like me. I knew that one, it's rough on the body, and two, if you don't progress, like you're just gonna end up being stagnant. And like in my position, dude, there's guys, 20-year-old kids, 23-year-old kids that dude, they can fab great, like ridiculously good. So if you learn and transition into the engineering side, management side, well then now these guys, you know, you're bringing them under your wing, they're working for you, so to speak, and then they're progressing too, right? Because now they're learning from someone that knows more, in essence, at the same time while you're transitioning out of doing fabric. And so like I've helped some friends of mine kind of make that transition and help them learn some of the CAD stuff too, because that's obviously another hurdle, just like everything. You have so many hours you need to just sit down and get it done. You can't just start drawing race cars. Like you got to start with a tab or something like that and transition through that. So a lot of that has to do with guys that are just doing that like nights and weekends. Like they'll be fabbing during the day and then they'll start transitioning by drawing this component or that component slowly, you know, over the course of years, and then eventually working their way into just almost stepping entirely back from doing fab work and just computer work. Because there's still a ton. Like the market is very hungry for that side too, for good guys. And the only reason I'm saying that is because I still get so much like interest in doing design work for XYZ, right? But I just don't have the bandwidth. So I turn down the vast majority of guys I deal with, unfortunately. Whereas, you know, if there's more guys stepping up or transitioning into that side of the industry, like there's definitely work available. Even though we're technically coming into like a weird downturn type deal, things like what Polaris does, and some of these OEMs, I mean, hell, like Ford with the Bronco, now with the Raptor R, stuff like that creates almost this perpetual research and development side of the industry that no matter what will never end, even if the economy starts to take a turn, because as the economy starts to turn or slow down, which we're starting to see the front side of that, the companies, to stay competitive, are still going to continue to push the R&D on the new stuff, right? Because if they don't, they see the writing on the wall that they will then fall back. So that sort of side of the industry, to have like these guys with experience in building stuff transition into being a design consultant, just like I have been doing for a while, is still something that they're very hungry for. And I don't see that disappearing even as there's an economic downturn. Hence why I was like, I've been pushing friends of mine to make that transition. You know, one of my best friends I went to high school with, actually we were a business partner back in the original GMR days. He'd made that transition a long time ago. He figured out that he did not want to do fab work, and he went straight into design. And I'm talking like 2007 range. So he went into like more supercar based stuff, like body design, composites. His name's Louis Dietz, it's Customs Factory. And so he's outside of off-road, so like very secluded, but like he did that, like that SSC car that like broke records and shit. Like he designed that car, and I'm trying to think of other things, but so he was the one that pushed me originally to like get out of doing fab work and transitioning into design development. And this is like late 2000s. And back then, like I'm saying, there wasn't really anyone messing with this stuff. It was far more rare, unfortunately. The days of like custom fabrication were more common. So now you've got even normal fab shops where they are deploying like, you know, CAD and everything they do, to where even if they're doing one-off builds, they're still like drawing shit up, having cages or components sent to like be laser cut, etc., and come back. whereas that was unheard of 10 years ago. It would be considered way too fucking expensive and way too time consuming. Whereas now, it's the complete inverse. It's way too time consuming to build trucks or UTVs by hand when you can have stuff drawn up relatively quickly and then, have everything lasered, and then you're more or less assembly welding. You're not really fabbing at that point.
Yeah.
So that whole table turned, I would say probably like 2014 to 18 range, to where that became the inverse. So like I'm saying, I just don't see that side of the industry going away anytime soon. So if you develop your skill sets in design development, you're going to still have a future in an industry, because the next few years are going to be rough. I mean, I had my fab shop, etc., through that downturn, which was like that late 2006, 2007, all the way up through 2008, 9, 10. And I had a lot of peers of mine that ended up going under. It was probably like half the industry. It's pretty bad at that point. And we're about to hit that same thing, unfortunately. So the guys that want to stay in the industry and keep moving forward, like that's a skill set that's valuable. You got to transition into CAD, even if you don't understand computers. You just got to start. You got to start with something.
I think it's life everywhere. Any type of industry that computers or technology, that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's not even getting into like the additive manufacturing side of our industry. Like the 3D printing stuff is going to blow up in our industry. Well, pretty much all automotive industries, but yeah, it's going to be something that is that next industrial revolution, quote unquote, in the entire aftermarket industry is the 3D printing by a long shot. Now, laser cut, tube laser, tube notching, bending, all that stuff is like easy, right? It's become seamless. That next phase is going to be all of the 3D printing and additive manufacturing aspects, from whether it's like stuff at SEMA into off-road racing, into like supercars, all that stuff. And you're seeing some of it already happen, but that's the next major transition is
what is educate me on that. So the 3D printing compared to what we're all doing now, what's the difference?
Yeah, so it depends on what specific aspect. So for like off-road, etc. Well, let's go back to some of the more rudimentary 3D printing stuff, or like the basis of why it started to become more popular. And that has to do more with R&D as opposed to what's considered end consumer or final product printing, because those are two different sides of printing. So printing initially was done as R&D side. So in other words, I can draw a component, especially on like machine stuff. So if I make machined bracketry or doodads for UTVs, like a mirror or this or that, right? Just something that you're going to have CNC machined in quantity. Instead of drawing that component and sending it to CNC machine and wasting material and time just to figure out whether or not you even like that rev, you can quickly 3D print something. So many years ago, this is a while ago, I don't even remember the specific years, 2013 or 14. Anyways, I was designing a truck for the King brothers, and they originally started that whole clevis shock thing, right? This when the original R&D for the clevis shocks was done on this set of links or whatever you want to call it that I designed for, at that specific time it was Ross King. All the prototype pieces were done in 3/4 scale because we didn't have 3D printers large enough to print that clevis at 1:1 scale. But that was something that was used in essence, that you could print that clevis, right, before you machine it, so you don't waste any of that time. So that's like the initial 3D printing direction that has changed how a lot of guys on my side, the R&D side, did things. Then we got bigger printers, we got faster printers. Now it's still FDM printing, some resin printing, some SLR printing, etc. But now we're able to print, instead of just doodads, larger doodads, and then even larger doodads, to where like we've even printed full arms, full things for even big truck stuff, right? To check, because if you're sending out a component that's yay big, that's going to a 5-axis CNC operation, that's an expensive piece. So you can print all that. Then you can press bearings in it. You can cycle it. So there's a lot of advantages to doing that. And that's like just the R&D side of 3D printing. And that's kind of already passed, right? That's considered more normal now, as opposed to like 5-6 years ago, that was incredibly rare. But also printers that could print anything in that size were like, they didn't fucking exist. Yeah. It was either it was insanely expensive or they didn't exist. Whereas now you can buy shit off Amazon that can easily handle pretty much the majority of R&D in our entire industry. But now we're transitioning significantly past that, which would be considered, so that would be R&D side printing, and that's kind of like what started a lot of this, in the automotive industry. And now we're transitioning into it would be considered like end product or final consumer printing. And you're starting to see a lot of that. And a great example of that would be like Craig Hall. He does an InConsumer Printing component, and that's a little, in essence, cover for the fuel cell inlets on race vehicles. And that he has 3D printed. And so that is now no longer an R&D piece. That's a final consumer product that is printed. So that would be a good example of something that has transitioned from, I can CNC this part, right, out of Delrin or aluminum. Well, that's now transitioned into, like, he's literally printing the manufacturing process, and that's an end consumer part. So now that transition is starting to take place even in the off-road racing industry. And he's had those for a few seasons, but that's what I'm getting at is those are two different sides of the table. Because the R&D side is more like the rudimentary and simple stuff, whereas like once you transition to the end consumer side, like that's where the real magic is, and that's where we're going to see stuff really start to take off. And so on that side of the table, you're starting to see a ton of other aspects, like with certain trucks or cars. There's tons of mounts and doodads and things that traditionally would have been like a billet component or like an injection molding component or something along those lines, that short-run manufacturing has transitioned into 3D printing the final component. And so that is where that next sort of big push is going to be, and that's where we're going to have a lot of advancement. What I'm working on, what I have patents on, is 3D printing of bodies. And that's going to be another thing where we are actually 3D printing body kits, race bodies, dashes, things along those lines. So that's a whole different animal, and that's more onto what I would be considering in consumer side as opposed to R&D side. And so that is another thing that will become more normal, and it has been. Like 2019 SEMA, if I remember correctly, no. It was, and then COVID hit, so it kind of got pushed back. So somewhere in that time frame, and I have to go look at my notes, the 1920 range, we did that tube chassis. It was right after COVID is when they finally built the car. So 2020 range, and I think it was at 2020 SEMA or some bullshit like that. I don't remember. I didn't go to that one. It was at 2021 SEMA. Anyways, it was the Nissan project for Valvoline, which is like the Chris Forsberg tube chassis Ultimaniac. The wide body kit on that we 3D printed. And that was years ago.
Yeah.
And so now we're working on 3D printing like all of our new platforms. So the new trophy truck, the class ones, all of those bodies are 3D printed. And so that is going to be another caveat of, again, an end consumer aspect of 3D printing, where we're not printing a mold or printing R&D. We're actually printing the physical body.
The product, that's going on.
Yes. And so that transition is currently happening, and that's where we're going to see, like I'm saying, that next industrial revolution, because that's going to take all this stuff significantly further. And it's primarily going to be focused on like these general shape and surface designs to start, because the technology currently is viable in that. So like you're not going to see 3D printed A-arms yet. You're not going to see like 3D printed suspension pieces yet, other than the R&D side, right? And so that will get there. I have a feeling inside of our lifetime there will be like 3D printed long travel kits. Now it'll be metal, but it will be printed. So the technology is going that quickly, and I'm not that old to where like at some point I think in our life we'll see this, to where like long travel manufacturers, or for example, like if I'm designing a new trophy truck, I can legitimately print a link arm or print a A-arm or upright. You see what I'm getting at?
It's crazy though.
Yeah. We're not far off from that, and I think we'll be seeing that soon. The real problem there is,
so that eliminates welding and all that stuff.
In essence, yeah. So most of that, or at least the current mentality for that direction, would be a printed component with a post-machine operation. So you would be printing it out of a material, whether that would be like a 17.4 or an aluminum or like an Inconel or a carbon base like a 4140 or 4130. You might print it. You might then heat treat it and then post-machine stuff. So if I was doing like an upright, like a portal upright for the new all-wheel drive type stuff, you would, in essence, be able to print that component. And now remember, if you're printing, it's organic. So in other words, it's additive manufacturing. So unlike machining, where you're doing material removal, you are adding material or you're building material. So how you design that part is literally the exact opposite of what we traditionally machine stuff for.
So that becomes a learning curve.
Big learning curve. And so, like that same upright that we are now traditionally taking a chunk and whittling it back down, now we're designing it the inverse way. So you would design it like in what I would do, print it, probably have it treated, so be it going through a heat treat process relative to whatever the base material is, let's say it's a 4140, then post-machining bearing race surfaces, indexing on this, so like where the arm mounts, you want all of those surfaces to be dialed, because the printing can make it really good, but the reality is a post-machine on that stuff is going to be like dialed. Eventually, eventually we will get to the point where the printing will be as close as a final machine. So then it would eliminate that entirely. But I'm just saying for the next progression, that's where I envision that next step is going to be a printed part that then post-machine. It'd be like a metal. Now on like the body stuff I'm doing, again, it's totally different than how we're doing bodies now. Because we can design bodies in a far more organic shape because everything we design no longer gets pulled from a mold. It's actually created on its own. So then we can design bodies that have different features. There can be pass in it for like wiring. You can like build stuff in structure into the body. It's totally different than what we were accustomed to with like a fiberglass layup or a carbon fiber layup where you're pulling from a mold, you know. On top of that, with like the printing side of it too, is now you've completely changed the game. The fact that Tom and Joe, whoever, they can have the same body but completely different. You can't really do that now. They all come from the same mold, right? Or you go back and you have to CNC machine an entirely new mold. It's incredibly expensive.
Yeah.
So when we did the Birdie truck, that was a SEMA Toyota deal. That whole body was done by ADV, and that was very expensive to machine all the molds and get that done. Very expensive. And it's more or less a one-off body, right? You're talking very few people can afford that or even go down that road for a one-off body. It's just too much money. And so even on like the race truck game, race car game, whatever you want to call it, if you're making a new body, right, whether you're going to Walker Industries, Fiberworks, etc., you have to have enough capital to get the first one done, and it's not cheap. Then you have to be able to extrapolate that out on hopefully selling 10, 12, 20 bodies down the road, right? Yeah. Because you're all pulling from the same mold. Whereas what I'm referring to is we would be printing them more or less from scratch, from filament. And so now I can print a body for this dude, right? That looks like generic truck or whatever the fuck you want to call it. Then I can take that same design, tweak it, and print another one for Tom, a different guy. So we don't have molds that we're stuck to. We can now more or less make the body customizable, not just to each individual driver or platform, but it would be customizable literally to whatever fucking race or sponsor. Because now we can 3D print all the like three-dimensional logos, three-dimensional aspects to everything, as opposed to just wrapping stuff. You can really go in more depth with like your, livery type of situation.
Yeah, I think it'd be extremely attractive at that level of racers and teams because like now they all kind of look the same. You have different wraps.
That's the unfortunate. And I've taught so many guys once like some of that word got out, what I'm doing, because I have these massive printers. They are 74 inches rough, or 72 inches by 38 inches by about 53, 54 inches. And so we can do these larger structures. And so a lot of them have come to me with like that same thing. I don't want the same body as so-and-so. Even though they may have the same truck from the same manufacturer, so to speak, or race vehicle, because buggies too, same deal. They want their own. And so this also opens that up because we're not beholden to the molds. So like the cost incursion on that changes significantly. And we've been dabbling with like all sorts of different filaments, from super cheese dick cheap stuff to significantly more expensive stuff. Like when we did the Forsberg deal, that was just straight PETG that was vinyl wrapped. It was like literally as cheap as you can get. There's nothing special whatsoever. And it worked. Like I think we did 2 full sets for him, and he like had one whole set for like a full season of like the Formula Drift
no issues.
Bullshit. I mean, they tore him up, but I mean it lasted. But that is like just straight cheap plastic filament off Amazon that's vinyl wrapped.
So is this going to be like different levels that you can buy into on it, or
as far as what I'm doing?
Yeah, or are you just standardizing one type of material?
No, there will be different materials per se, and I don't have that necessarily perfected, because just in like the last 6 months, materials have changed. Like the progression of the filaments is a constant evolving thing with all of these filament manufacturers. So like I'm still experimenting with stuff, and I'm going to keep experimenting with stuff even throughout us building these new platforms. So even when it hits race day number 1, right, the body that's on that truck may be different than what I want to print for body 2. You see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
So there's no, obviously, because there's no such thing as a standard. Like I'm creating my own standard that like I don't have that path figured out yet. It's more like we're just doing all this different stuff to see where we land, because it's revolving. Because the science on the printer side is really mundane. Like the extrusion systems, the printers themselves, I mean, they just move normal. Like this is not complex CNC stuff. The science, however, on the filaments is where we have the biggest opportunity and where the most advancement's been happening, at least in the last few years. And that's going to keep going.
How do you keep up with the changes of material?
It's not easy.
It's a constant learning process.
Like I literally have boxes of filaments that I had bought like a year ago to test, that I've already got other stuff in the test that are like newer versions of that, and like I don't have any use for those. I didn't even have time to test them.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're gonna, like, in other words, it's gonna get figured out at some point. Whether I do it or someone else, like this is gonna get figured out again in our lifetime. And then the inverse will be how things are done. Every single race car, every single wide body kit, all this stuff is going to be 3D printed. All of it. Even from the higher level manufacturing, as speeds start to increase, as filaments become more consistent, things along those lines. But the progression just in the last 5 or 6 years in printers and filaments has radically changed. Like to where like at first it kind of seemed like this is just like insane. Like there's no fucking way what I'm saying is going to happen. To now it's like, holy shit, this is going to happen. Whether the industry likes it or not, like all of this is fucking changing.
Well, the progression's quick. And we were talking about 3D scanners. It wasn't that long ago that you had said we weren't even doing that.
Exactly.
10 years ago, whatever.
It was too expensive. It was way too expensive. I mean, even when I bought our stuff, so we were on RTech, and I bought it a while ago, and to get everything said and done, I mean, it was between 40 and 60 grand total, if you count like the computers and the other bits and all that.
I would say a lot of off-road companies aren't just looking to spend 60 grand on that.
Yeah. So but see, at the same time, you have to remember, like, I was a consulting firm that literally just did that ground and pound R&D for the companies day in and day out. So it was like as if I was going to buy a CNC lathe or a mill or more welders, right? That was my tool set.
Yeah.
So like we didn't have shop tool sets. The scanning stuff was our tool set. The 3D printers were our tool sets.
Scanners and computers.
There you go. Yeah. So as a firm that does that, that's normal. Again, another aspect why it's just very easy, or typically speaking, it's easier for most of the firms, fab shops, however you want to call it, race teams, to then hire someone like our firm to do this type of stuff, right? Because we had already invested in all this. We already knew how to use all of it. Because that's the other part, is like the learning curve. And even the guys today, I see like a lot of guys that will just buy scanners, right? And then they still struggle to get things going. Well, because just like a lot of things, the scanning side of the industry still has a lot to get figured out in standardization and processes. So it's more like the wild, wild west right now. Whereas if you're buying a TIG welder and you're going down the road of trying to weld like a lot of these guys on Instagram, etc., there's pretty sound fundamental standardization in how to get to achieve that. It's fairly common now. Whereas like the scanner stuff, although still not necessarily new, it's new enough to where you still have this sort of learning curve that you have to get over somehow. And the process is to go from this chassis or this arm to something I can legitimately model off of. So you still have that as the backside, as opposed to like I already spent money on the scanner. So that has to be factored in too. Hence why, again, there's all these firms, etc., companies that still need guys that can independently do design work. Even if you are like a single guy that buys your own scanner to do processing and design, like there's so many businesses that need that specific service. And that's not going to go away in our lifetime. Like there's no fucking way. Yeah. The only thing that may change that is if the OEMs decide to cut all that off. So the main thing that the scanning has really done is it has changed the game, where we used to have to basically like blow the OEM guys to like get us files. Whereas now scanning, it's like, oh, you're going to be a dick about it? We'll just fucking scan it. Fuck off. Like, and get it done. One of the best examples I can think of is when we did stuff for Toyota. they like were super reluctant to send us OEM files. And so when we did that to Birdie Truck, they were super weird about sending us the cab for 2000. I'm trying to remember the year, 2020 or 2021. No, maybe it was 2018. It was a while ago. But anyways, they didn't want to send it to us. And so we just scanned the cab. And then we designed the chassis. And then they finally sent us the OEM stuff after like the chassis was already on the chassis table, like being built. I was like, dude, like you're like 6 weeks behind schedule, bro. Like,
I mean, what does it matter at this point in time with technology?
I think it's more ego. Whenever you're dealing with that side of the table,
they want you to go figure it out. Well,
there's this weird dynamic too. Unfortunately, with guys like myself, because like I don't have a degree in engineering. My other peers that do what I do, they do not. I can think of one guy that actually does have a degree in engineering, and he doesn't really do any real design work for others. He used to kind of, but most of the guys do what I do. Like we don't have degrees in engineering. So whenever you are going down the road, not so much like the racing side or like if you're designing UTV parts ish, right? But if you're doing like SEMA builds or more of this factory-based stuff, you end up butting heads with some of the OEM engineers because like this weird mentality that like we're not real engineers, like guys like myself, which is fine.
They went to school and
there you go. Yeah, and so there was always like that weird ruffling of feathers with stuff. And then once we got the scanning stuff, it was like we don't even fucking like need you guys. Like we'll just scan whatever we need and move forward. Like because we'll move 10 times faster than they do. They're so when it comes to stuff that's like SEMA projects, that's the main thing right there is because like there's nothing you can do. Like SEMA has a fucking deadline. No matter what you do, that event is going. So either you make it to the event or you don't. And if you don't, like on our side of the table, like when we're contracted to do this or that, right? If we don't deliver, like they could be fucked. And if they're fucked, well then now we look horrible and the probability of getting repeat work becomes almost never going to happen type of situation. Yeah. And so in that realm, like if you can scan stuff and be drawing a chassis or working on a piece that weekend or the next week as opposed to like waiting for OEM files to come in weeks later, like you just bought yourself 15 days. That's huge for a SEMA build. Even if it's like March even if it's like December or January and you're starting stuff for SEMA of that year, that November, so you almost have a whole year. But yeah, 15 days is a big deal. Yeah. If you're doing full SEMA builds, ground up type stuff, which I just don't even bother anymore. It's way too stressful. But doing that rodeo is fun. I suggest to all the younger guys if they can get into that side of things to do it. But it is by a long shot the worst side of design consulting because there's deadlines. You can't get around that. If you don't get shit done and it does not go smooth right off the bat, like there's no repeats. You can't just be like, okay, we'll go to SEMA next year. Like it doesn't work like that. This is a brand new car model or this is a brand new thing that has to be delivered that year. It doesn't work like that. You can't just be like, oh, we'll just show the 2021 at 2022 SEMA. Like, you know what I mean? So that is a little stressful, but that scanning stuff has like completely changed that game entirely. Because now you just get it done and move forward.
Do you think, I know it's kind of random, but like AI has been like big topics right now all over. Do you think at some point AI will take over some of that like design stuff? Like
yes and no. There's large swaths of the industry that it will, but you have to remember it can only take over that stuff if set standards are in place.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing a wide body kit, it's reasonable to assume that you can push that off to AI really fucking quickly because a wide body kit for the new Corvette, right? Not really going to have too much variation than the 30 other fucking wide body kits for the previous Camaros or Chevy product line, right? Yeah. Whereas if you're designing a brand new something that didn't really exist previously, right?
There's nothing
it's going to struggle more with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it has to have something to pull from to some degree. It can't just make it up out of thin air. It doesn't work like that. So the artistic side of things, in essence, isn't really ever going to go away when it comes to the leading edge or the newer-esque stuff or the stuff that would be infringing on more race-based stuff. I just don't see like AI ever legitimately taking over designing like race platforms. It's too much artistic feel into mechanical stuff that it's hard to cross that bridge. But there's a ton of stuff that it will. So let's say, for example, UTV cages. AI would be a good application for that because there's not much you can do or deviation from what's currently a ton of examples to pull from, other than here's our new dimensions. So like obviously the cage pickup points and stuff like that are going to change, right? But you can tell them, make this new cage, and it's going to be able to pop something out relatively quick and simple that's based on most stuff. Same with like long travel bits and things like that. It's going to be able to take over good chunks of that side of the industry at some point, but it's going to be some time till that can happen. And I feel like when you start infringing on too hardcore mechanical stuff, there's so much stuff that can go wrong in the real world still that it's very rough to rely on that. So maybe you could use that to get like really good first drafts, cut down the time frame to get stuff into R&D, but you're still going to always have a final touch or a final bit that has to be massaged in real life to get you to that final step of proper manufacturing. So like, if anything, all it's going to do is speed up that R&D time frame, but never really eliminate like that sort of guy that still has to at some point finalize the CAD file and get it ready for production. You see what I'm getting at? And we're still going to have time till that happens, you know?
Yeah, I feel like it's slowly becoming a thing right now, you know? It's kind of everywhere.
Yeah, and then the other side of it too is liability.
Yeah.
You have to keep in mind that if you are a decent sized manufacturer or you have something that could in theory kill somebody, you got to be careful, because at the end of the day someone's going to have to be responsible, and you're not going to be able to show up in court and be like, oh yeah, it was AI. Doesn't work like that. So unfortunately, even with just the generic aspect of people sue the fuck out of each other for everything these days, you're going to have some sort of human component to that, no matter how much work you can shove onto AI, because especially like in any aftermarket side of the industry, and the reason I use like stuff like body components and things like that, because like frankly, like your wide body kit ain't really going to kill somebody, but suspension, cages, you know, stuff like the UTV side, like yeah, dude, like if you don't do things properly, like you could totally kill somebody, and then for obvious reasons, now you've got an entire liability chain nightmare on the legal side of things. Yeah. And that's just become, unfortunately, more prevalent as we see more and more lawsuits. Even from the full race stuff on down, there's more and more lawsuits that you see pop up in these sort of avenues. And that's another aspect that the firms are going to have to navigate as AI gets used more and more. But, you know, like I'm saying, it's going to have its applications. I don't think it's going to eliminate the big chunks of the industry. I think it's just going to make things a lot easier for guys. And we're still probably 10 years out, maybe 5 years minimum till like we can really start to like plug it into stuff.
I kind of hope it's further out. It's a little sketchy.
It is, but like I'm saying, it would be like the way I would view it, if I was still going to be headstrong into the consulting side of things per se, I would be focused on, like if it's like UTV cages, it'd be like a great application to just do like all the fucking grunt work. Like here's a new UTV model, here's the pickup points, you know, basically have it start all of that and then final the design and get ready for cutting. So in other words, something that could have taken you 10 or 15 hours, you could cut down to like 2 or 3 hours. That's where I see it's going to be used first and foremost, and the majority of that. Yeah. Or other than like the outside of off-road, you've got like the Fast and the Furious stuff, where you got guys that are going to do more cosmetic-based type stuff, where you're going to import X, Y, or Z, and then do wing kits, you know, spoiler kits, things like that on new car models are going to be like really fast compared to the traditional way with the utilization of AI.
Yeah, I look at it, so I come from the film side, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a video on YouTube of this guy, and he has this whole timeline on his Adobe Premiere. Yeah. Like a long timeline.
Oh, where he crushed it down? The editing thing?
The AI just did it for him.
Yeah, I saw that.
Within like seconds, it just moved everything.
Yeah. But see, the thing is, there's so much for that to pull from.
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at? There's a lot for AI to pull from to know how and what to do to make that consistent, or to make that final product significantly closer to like a real final product, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but then you still have to go through fine-tune everything.
That's what I'm getting at, is you still have a human touch to some degree. And in theory, that's going to be deteriorated more and more as the technology gets better. But like with what we do, it's gonna be rough to implement that appropriately. Like I'm saying, more of the generic builders, more of the generic product lines will be able to implement that significantly faster, as opposed to like the guys that are trying to develop new race platforms,
custom one-off stuff.
Yeah. So it's going to be like a double-edged sword, just like everything in our industry. In that AI is going to be great for some of the guys doing this more mass production based stuff, right? But at the same time, what AI truly is going to do is it's going to now make the guys that do more hand fabrication or custom fabrication more valuable. Mm-hmm. So because at the end of the day, the affluent clientele that want the nicer stuff, they have no fucking problem paying more to have something that his buddy can't either afford or can buy because this is a unique build from this. So like what Morgan Clark does, for example, he legitimately is building a bunch of stuff, but he's making them all kind of truly unique. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so that sort of side of the table is actually going to become far more sought after the more the AI is implemented. That makes sense.
So you're saying the AI is going to be producing more general, universal stuff, and then
it could be used for more extreme stuff too, but it's never going to eliminate it. But my point being is, by the simple default of how the market works with clientele that can afford to be outside of the more normal stuff, right? They will have no problem paying more premiums to have more one-off stuff. And so that will
because there's a creative and artistic side that AI will never be able to replicate.
That and just the fact they're like, well, it truly is a one-off, right? And so AI is going to make sort of that in theory, and this is just a theory because obviously we're still ways away from this, but I'm just envisioning that as AI gets implemented more and more in our industry, the guys that truly are doing more of the artistic one-off stuff are going to become even more valuable, is where I see it, because it's going to differentiate this even more than it already is, because the industry has already kind of seen this happen a few times. The first time it really happened was when flat plate was starting to be lasered, and we started doing more cookie cutter stuff. And then chassis and stuff like that started to be lasers. It started to be far more cookie cutter, to where you're making 30 trucks, 50 trucks that are all the same, cars, UTV stuff, whatever. Whereas you still have occasionally guys that will do very custom one-off based stuff, right? And they're going to be far more sought after, but at the same time, their output is very small because it's a bandwidth issue relative to time consumption, and they can only do so many hours, etc. But they're becoming more sought after in that they can charge more and more an hour, and they get longer wait lists and more clientele, whereas the other side of the table is more like the guys that are just buying straight product and pumping it out. So my point being is, I envision that AI is a double-edged sword. It's going to be very beneficial in some aspects. It's going to piss some people off too, but it's also going to be very beneficial in that these guys that are truly custom or the one-off type guys with the more artistic side, they're going to become more sought after, and they're going to become more of like jewels, so to speak, in that you do have a very bespoke X, Y, or Z that's done this way, and no one else has that, you know? And even if that guy were to have another client step up to try and build the same thing, never ends up the same. So like that sort of avenue, I think, is going to become another sort of weird niche that's going to grow and become very sought after too. But you're talking incredibly like skilled, handcrafted type stuff. Basically the entire fucking inverse of what I do, which is everything in the computer. You know?
It's going to be interesting to see like the last 10 years, how much everything's progressed. And then to jump into this next 10 and see. Yeah,
it's just going to segment out, you know, and transition stuff outward into these sort of silos.
Yeah.
That's what I think is going to happen. Because no matter where you go or how technologically advanced you can get, you're never going to eliminate the affluent clientele that have no problem paying more for one-off type stuff. That's never going to go away.
Yeah.
And it's only going to get worse or better as the market becomes more generic. That makes sense. And so that's what I'm envisioning some of these paths that some of these guys are going to end up taking. And off-road is also in a weird transition stage too, where the affluent side of the industry is wealthier than it's ever been. You've got guys that grew up loving off-road, that now have the capital to legitimately spend in our industry. So that's another reason why off-road has seen this sort of massive increase in spending, so to speak. Not just the UTV side's a different dynamic per se, because they've made the financing side of it very simple and very, very low bar to get into UTV stuff. Whereas prior to that, if you were doing sand cars or things like that, you're still at a minimum of $100, $150, $200,000, right? So that's one side of it. But what I'm referring to is individuals who grew up looking at either race trucks or big pre-runners, same with like hot rods, etc. But they have now the capital to spend on this type of stuff, are now in their 45, 55, 60-year-old range. So that has changed because obviously in the early 2000s, they were either just starting families or they were still like punk kids in high school with no money, right? And so that dynamic has changed significantly to where now this top side of the industry, or the more expensive side of the industry, so to speak, has just completely blown up, and back 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you had maybe 2 or 3 expensive trucks being built a year, maybe, big pre-runner, one or two.
Even dropping down off the 6100s and trophy trucks, like the Terra Crew era down here in SoCal, the amount of very nicely built pre-runners these guys have.
Yes.
It's gnarly. Like you go to a pre-runner meet, we were just talking about Fiesta Island, but there'll be 500-600 trucks lined up on the beach. And
all with $100,000 in them.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And so that same thing happened in pro touring like a while back, right? But then those guys started to age out.
Yeah.
So in the early 2000s to like 2011-12 range, it seemed like the pro touring stuff blew up, and those were the dudes that were in their like 50s and 60s spending money. Well, now we're starting to see that transition into like the off-road stuff where you're getting all these dudes 45 years old plus that have the capital to start doing that, or even guys that are in their 30s that now have the money they didn't in high school, right? But they didn't really change. We still like the same stuff per se because that was the cool shit, right? We just didn't have the money to do it like they do now. And so it's not uncommon to have, like you're saying, a Toyota Tacoma or a Ford with $100,000 into it, easy. And that's like a normal thing now. Whereas, 15 years ago, that was like insane. There was like a handful of those being built in the forums, a handful. And so now
a lot of these guys are young, dude. It's crazy. I was talking to a shop down in San Diego, and they had a build going on down there, and this kid was 19.
Well, that's not his money.
The kid lived on his own. Supposedly it was from his solar company or whatever he worked for. But this kid dumped $90,000 into his truck.
That could be.
Went out, first couple trips out, totaled the truck. It was right back in the shop, getting redone again.
Yeah, that could be other things going on, but it's not like it's not like that kid's spending $1 million on a truck.
No.
Or $500,000, and that's where more of what I'm referring to, where there's that higher side of the market that like it is very easy to build a nice pre-runner that is $350,000 is a low budget for a nice pre-runner per se. Especially with what we're seeing today, where big boy race truck stuff is well above. You're into 7 figures, and so that would be something insane. Like for example, Mason has. I talked to him not that long ago. He was saying it was either a 12 or 13 on back order. All of those are above $1 million trucks. That's unheard of. Back in the day, there'd be like 2 or 3 geysers being built, and those would be like $350,000 to $380,000, and that was considered as baller as it can be. Tisco has 10 plus trucks being built right now. These are very expensive builds. Then you have other builders similar, SLR, etc., Herps, stuff like that. These are all excess of $400,000 to $450,000, infringing on $500,000 vehicles, each and every one. And there's like 30, 40 a year being built between all the major guys.
What steps it up from $500,000 to over $1 million? Like what's that
specific example?
What's that second jump that?
Oh, so for them between like a Herps I want to say are going to be in the high 4s for a 6100 range, and then closer to 6 if you're doing like a Gibbs package trophy truck. But those are rear-wheel drive platforms, relatively straightforward. In other words, there's not like too much crazy shit going on that's either making the time consumption a lot on the build side or the component consumption really high. So for like a 6100, you're going to be at that 500 rough range, 480 to 500, whether it's Herbst or some of the others. I think Brenthal's a little bit less expensive, but to jump past that into the big truck stuff, well, now you're getting into like the mid-engine all-wheel drive type platforms. The sheer cost of componentry, the sheer cost of time consumption is at least double what would be like a more normal 6100 truck. And so right off the bat, by default, the cost incursion, even on the builder side, so if I'm building it to sell it, is significantly more than like a 6100. And especially when you're, like I'm getting at, the mid-engine type platforms, everything is more complex. And so with complexity, you have more time consumption and cost. So now that's where that's really pushing things to that point. So a competitive 6100 truck, you're going to be between 400 to 500 range. There are a few guys that have kind of dabbled selling stuff below that, but the reality is to be competitive in 6100, that's like a fairly proper budget to purchase a new truck, whether it's from
to have a reliable, durable truck.
Well, none of them are durable by technicality; they all fall apart. Yeah. So it's not like, but that's just how racing is. The term I like to use, not like reliable or durable. The term I would use would be competitive versus non-competitive. The vast majority of guys, unfortunately, are purchasing new vehicles and they're not competitive. That's just the reality. And it could be one of a few different reasons. One, they don't drive as hard. Two, they're not necessarily concerned on being on the edge to get them to that podium spot, right? They're more like, let's just show up and cruise and have a good time. Or three, they simply just don't have the funding for the logistics side, the prep side, and more importantly, the practice side, i.e.
Yeah, so the whole prep side is a whole different ball game in that.
Yeah, so building a race truck is, typically speaking, like if you're going trophy truck or 6100, it's going to be about a quarter of the cost you have to incur to be competitive. So if you're going to be 6100, let's say 500 grand, you realistically need almost $2 million to be competitive, and that's going to include chase trucks
for platforms. A season.
Well, if you're starting out, right? Yeah. Not to continue a season, but I'm going from zero to I want to be competitive in 6100, it's about $2 million roughly, because you need to purchase. You're going to have a primary chase truck and trailer and at least one or two secondary trucks. Then on top of that, you're going to have the infrastructure behind the scenes, prep cost, time to practice. Then you have all the logistics and the bullshit of showing up at the races, things like that. And that's without even like getting a helicopter or some of the other wazoo stuff that some of the guys like to do. Then if you're paying for all the guys to go, you're paying for all the stuff to show up at each race, things like that. So, and the process takes a few seasons. It's not as simple as you just get up and go. Like you need to purchase a truck, build your infrastructure out, because you're going to have your own team. And then, so it's usually about a 2-season process to get a guy from start to finish or from zero to legitimately running. Now, that's not talking about like the arrive and drive programs. That's different, like what Brenthal does. But that's if I have never been off-road racing and I want to go buy a 6100 and I want to go be competitive. Mm-hmm. It's about a 24-month process, depending on how soon that builder can build the vehicle, right? So you figure it's 8 months to 12, 14 months to build the vehicle. Then you have to buy the chase. You see what I'm getting at? So the truck itself is typically not the expensive part. It's the other stuff, the ancillary bits, is where it really adds up, and most guys don't understand or think about that.
That keeps everything rolling.
Yeah. Now, if I already have all that stuff, right, you can be competitive in 6100 if you already have the truck and you have all of your equipment, etc., for like $350,000, $400,000 a year. Granted, you don't completely grenade the truck and have to rebuild it like every other race, And then when you transition to like the big boy all-wheel drive type stuff, the numbers just go way up. So like a prep on a 6100, legitimately, you're going to be at 30, 40 grand on the high side for like a normal prep. If you're not rebuilding the motor, you're kind of just doing like more normal stuff. Whereas like the all-wheel drive platforms, like ours, for example, it's going to be about 100 and change. The motors realistically are only good for like one main race, maybe 1,000 miles. If like, for example, we deal with Dugan's, I tell him, hey, we want that motor specifically built for the Baja 1000. Cool. If not, I'll tell him build it just for the Mint 400, which means after that 400 and change miles, we're probably going to have it rebuilt. That's a minimum of 20 grand just for the motor. Then you've got gear sets, portals, bearings, bolts, all the shocks, things like that. So like on the all-wheel drive type stuff, that expense goes way up. So you realistically now are incurring double at a minimum what would be like over a 6100. And that's to be competitive, mind you. So like that's what I was getting at, is there's two different conversations. Because there's a lot of guys that, and it's no fault to whatever they're doing, but they just want to show up and have fun, and that's great. But if you want to have a conversation where I want to show up and legitimately have a chance at beating Menzies or McMillan, etc., those are two different avenues.
Yeah.
You know, and the reality is, unless you enter the game understanding those avenues, you're just going to get like butthurt. You know, but that doesn't mean that going and having fun isn't necessarily a bad thing, because there's a lot of guys that do that too. But you just have to be realistic with yourself. Like, if you want to go compete against the top guys, this is where that level is at. If you don't and you want to go have fun, there are definitely more budgetary stuff that you can do. And I also cater to that side too. Like, we sell chassis on DIY. I sell a decent amount of them too, where guys are building their own 6100s, etc. And they're doing it on like their own budget. So way less money than what I am referring to. What I'm referring to with those numbers was like, if I'm a brand new guy and I'm calling Herps or calling even like SLR, who's technically an old builder but a new builder, Spencer Lowe, he's going to be in that range too for a 6100. And so that's also a good mark, because 6100 is going to be more or less a premier class coming up here shortly. By default, Trophy Truck is so expensive to run that it's naturally being weeded out, where guys are naturally pulling back to move into 6100, because real soon here, and I think the writing's on the wall already, but unless you're in a mid-engine all-wheel drive, you're just not going to be competitive in Trophy Truck or in limited class stuff. Maybe in some of the other series, like a Legacy series, but like anything that's real, the bigger class type stuff, the reality here is it's going to be mid-engine all-wheel drives, and then the battle between the mid-engine all-wheel drive builders and the racers themselves, with both the prep, the driving ability, logistics, on top of just the engineering too. So like, you know, you've got so much more to it than, can I design a better truck? That's kind of like one small part of the equation, realistically. And so that's why, like, again, just like how everything ebbs and flows and changes, Trophy Truck is going to differentiate into these seven-figure trucks realistically, plus the backing appropriately. The guys that are not competitive in that obviously are going to stop having as much fun. They're going to start to transition down into 6100. So 6100, I think, is going to grow rapidly in the next 4 or 5 seasons, because by default,
it's more budgetary class. And
which is crazy to think about, because 6 seasons ago, what I'm referring to, the 6100 being a budgetary class or whatever, was like what Pinnacle Trophy Truck was 6 to 8 years ago. So like it's happened that rapidly. And so then,
so the advancements in technology and all this stuff has brought it just to a different level.
Yeah, things have changed rapidly. And if you just go back for the last 2 seasons, just 2021 and 2022, and you look at the results of all the main stuff. So that's going to be like Score. Score would be like the best one to focus on. BITD, Mint 400, some of these others. Mason's mid-engine all-wheel drive type platform have pretty much just taken the whole thing. Like, for the most part, if you start stacking up all that stuff, Mason has completely cleaned the field. And that's also why you're seeing kind of like the country club or the who's who are all driving Masons to some degree. Or some of them have multiple Masons, actually, like 2 Masons. But the point being is that transition is, whether or not the racers like it, is happening relatively quickly. So these older rear-wheel drive type platforms are in essence being like self-phased out by the default of guys are going to have less fun, and they're going to start shifting. Because either they have to step up with that cost incursion, or they're going to shift to 6100 where they have a fighting chance. So like at the San Felipe race this year, I think it was 43 6100 showed up, whereas the previous year was 36. Next year I think it's going to be over 50. I mean, I personally know of about 20 6100 trucks being built right now that will be done in the next season or 2 to compete. And these are guys that...
You got one in here?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that class is going to grow as the next competitive class. Not that Trophy Truck will be. And then I see UTV having 2 or 3 premier classes that will pretty much take the cake on that. Everything else is going to fall to the wayside, unfortunately. So you'll have Trophy Truck 6100, and obviously Trophy Truck Legends, because that's the old dudes. Class 1 is we're trying to have some Class 1 revival. I'm doing my best with that too. But like our class 1s, etc., is geared more towards Aussies. That's a big thing down there. They are buggy people by default, the Australians. So the truck stuff is not cool to them to some degree. So like the class 1s we're
building, a little backwards from here.
Yes and no, because you also have to remember that it wasn't that long ago where like Harvey Lettner basically dominated in class 1. So like it is different, whereas I grew up as a truck guy. I'm more of a truck guy myself. But the majority of the Australians I know, they tend to lean more onto buggies being like the bee's knees, you know? So like several of the cars I'm building will end up in Australia. And if I build and sell more class 1s, there's a high probability those will end up going to Australia.
Yeah. Whereas
like the truck stuff, for obvious reasons, it's going to be stateside mostly. But yeah, it is interesting to see what's happening right now, because that side of the market, if you're building and designing new race platforms, has changed. The last few seasons have had some massive stuff happen that is creating, like I'm saying, these sort of new silos. Trophy truck is going to be more or less mid-engine all-wheel drives that are competitive. 6100 is just going to blow up. 6100 is going to be a driver's class where you're going to have arguably the best talent, because now you've got guys who have platforms that are so close to being like dialed together, and so many of them, I mean dozens of them at each race, that now it's really more of a driver's class. Because trophy truck will never have as many 6100s by default. I just don't ever see that happening.
Yeah, so it'll probably actually be more fun racing in the 6100 class, going head to head with guys. And
I think, I hate to say it, but I honestly think some of the UTV stuff is probably going to end up being the most fun. I think those are going to grow like crazy.
UTV racing, like the suspension side of UTVs, when are they gonna figure out a better platform for suspension?
I think the UTV thing, the biggest drawback or the problem they're having right now, has far more to do with the politics and the sanctioning bodies than it does with anything else. All the different sanctioning bodies, the different classes, the differentiations in the rules, the gray areas in the rules, and how like that's manipulated is so kind of like not standardized enough to create a solid foundation for these guys. It's like it's all kind of just shooting in the dark and guesswork. As they get that dialed in and figured out, the UTV stuff is only going to progress even more. Because right now, if I'm building a car to be competitive in score, I'm doing shit differently than BITD. I'm doing shit differently than Legacy. Because there's gray areas in the rules that we can exploit in the different classes, whether it's Pro Turbo, etc. So as they kind of hammer that out and get that better, i.e. like in Trophy Truck, you obviously don't have any rules in that sort of degree, and 6100 is more or less now standardized between the different sanctioning bodies to where, like, generically speaking, a competitive 6100 for score is going to be a very similar platform to BITD, etc. So what I'm getting at is, as they can hopefully figure some of this out, maybe even reduce some of the classes, because UTV racing, it's like fucking... The differentiation is like 20 or 30 classes between the different main sanctioning bodies, and it's all just all over the place. And so as they figure that out, I feel like the UTV stuff is going to explode even more than it already is, because the cost incursion to go racing is significantly less. You've got a lot more sponsorship opportunity that has a much better ratio, i.e. sponsorship cost incursion or sponsorship available funds is a much higher ratio of your specific race team's cost incursion, so that you can close that gap. So in other words, in Trophy Truck, etc., no matter who you are or who your big sponsor is, you're still spending family money or your own money to some degree for the majority or the high part of that ratio to go racing.
Yeah.
UTV, that ratio, if you play your cards right, can be significantly closer. And so that's
price-wise, what are you going to break? Maybe an axle, maybe a diff.
I mean, it depends. You could wad the car up, etc. But
yeah, I mean, outside of a crash, but you're not...
Yeah, but see, that's, again, the crash part is almost like the cheapest part. The real problem with racing in general, especially off-road, and the most expensive part that everyone ignores is the time off, is being able to go testing. Fucking Menzies will spend 2 weeks in Baja. Like, I don't even know guys that can take 2 weeks, 3 weeks off of work. You see what I'm saying? Away from family, away from this. That's huge.
To go spend a bunch of money on testing.
There you go. So it's not so much that, like, if I wad the car up racing, it's like, can I even afford to go testing every single weekend? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Can I go drive and take 3-4 days off of work every other weekend to go spend that time in the car 200, 300, 400 miles a day?
paying whatever guys go with you, shock tuners,
yes.
and
so that's the real hidden expense that we're the top that really differentiates these top guys out, because they can actually sit and get just an insane amount of seat time that really allows them to hone the skill sets, as opposed to the more like weekend warrior guy that's just showing up to the race, and that's kind of his seat time, other than like dicking around in his pre-runner UTV with the family on occasion. You see what I'm getting at? Mm-hmm. So it's almost like they're treating it like professional drivers, even though like they aren't, because like the dynamic doesn't really work. Like no one's really paid, quote unquote, to drive to some degree. Like there's a few caveats to that in some of the bigger truck stuff, but for the most part, like it's still a pseudo weekend warrior type sport where the guys that can differentiate out of that typically will have more success by default of they simply practice more, they practice harder, and they can consistently do that through a season. And so as we see more of that happen, again, it's going to be more competitive guys. So instead of like a handful of guys showing up that can win, imagine showing up to a race and you've got 24 entries that all of those can legitimately podium. That's a huge difference than my handful that most likely will be on the podium, and then everyone else is kind of basically fighting for 4th through 10th.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know. Are you into Supercross at all?
Not so much Supercross. My wife's family is in motorcycle racing.
Yeah, so I grew up on the moto side of life, but
yeah.
So this last like season or two of Supercross, it was the same way. Like you have your top 5 guys.
Yeah.
And that's the only top 5 guys you see every single race.
So it's like a rotation of those guys on the podium.
Yeah, it just gets annoying. Like you're watching the same race over and over, and then like 2 races ago, the top guys, the top 3, got injured.
Yeah.
And the last 2 races were the most exciting races.
Yeah.
All season, because you had a bunch of guys who are good, great riders. They just can't keep up with that top 5 level, you know? And I think just from a racing standpoint, it's a lot more fun, like you're saying, having a group of guys that can all battle head to head.
Yep. That's what I was saying is I think 6100 is going to be a more premier class than trophy truck will be.
Yeah.
You get 50 trucks to enter like a San Felipe or a 500 or a 400, etc. With 24 of them that legitimately can podium. I mean, now you're really throwing stuff into the mix as opposed to just a few guys. Not that that's a bad thing, but off-road has unfortunately been plagued for a long time with this sort of like class differentiation bullshit where they'll allow like 2 or 3 guys to be in a class and then they're like, oh yeah, we won. Well, it's like, yeah, dude, like you didn't race against anyone. Like, you know what I mean? You're always going to win if you and 2 of your buddies are always first, second, third, because you're the only 3 ones in your class. Like, you know, that's why it'd be nice to see.
That almost doesn't make it, like, to me, mentally worth paying all that money.
Well, but see, here's the thing. This all stems from 10, 15 years ago when product manufacturers were capitalizing on class differentiation to sell product. So if I want to sell this specific product and I can differentiate or get my specific vehicle into a class that doesn't really have competition, next season I get to sell product now under a championship banner.
Yeah.
You see what I'm getting at? So that stems from stuff that was happening 15, 20 years ago that sort of created this weird precedent that like this class differentiation was kind of like the thing, and it's okay if there's 1 or 2 guys that show up or 4 guys that show up, like, you know, and then now you've got this guy's now a champion, but it's like you've never heard of him or don't understand. But it's like, well, no, in this specific silo of a class thing, they won that race. You just see what I'm getting at?
Yeah.
When it's like,
but for the public eye,
that's not like real racing to some degree.
Yeah.
It's kind of like playing the gray area to get a title, right? Whereas like I'm saying, it would be cool if they clean up the UTV side to where it's 1 or 2 classes. Realistically, as premier classes, everything else will shuffle under to more sportsman type stuff, and they just let that be. Make it more simplistic for the specific rule sets, and then boom. And then it would be nice to have 50, 60, 70 cars in each class, where now you've got several dozen guys that can win. And that's where it's going to, like, again, be far more advantageous for the racers and the fans. Downside is that's the complete inverse of what the OEMs want to see. The manufacturers want the inverse of that. They want the class differentiation, and they do not want competition in the classes because they want to be able to then go to the store to sell their car with that title. Yeah. So it's this weird battle that, you know, some racers they get very agitated by that. Like I'm saying, they view it more from my side, where they want to have a starting line full of fucking dudes, but their sponsors want the complete inverse. See what I'm saying?
Because it's money. It's money based on the manufacturer side or the sponsor side. Whereas a racer, like mentally, you want to go head to head with guys, you know?
If you're a true racer, you want to race against the best, period. And you want to race against all of them. Not like, I beat Joe on this one day because of this specific caveat. Like, you know, that's not how real racers operate, or competitive individuals in general.
Yeah.
You know, and so that is sort of this unpleasant deterioration of what, like I'm saying, could be considered like real racing mentality. And that's once you get sort of like that backside of the greediness to some degree to kind of wrap its paws around some of this stuff, it deteriorates that side of it. And who knows if we can get away from that at some point, but I think as they do, things will be better. It's just really difficult when you're getting money from sponsors X, Y, or Z, and their whole direction is the inverse of that. So whereas you get it, and see, here's the other thing too, as you get into those higher classes, you notice it doesn't work like that, because now you're outside of that sponsorship hold. So it's a double-edged sword, like I'm referring to, like on the UTV stuff. That ratio is really close, but at the same time, you're kind of held by that. Mm-hmm. Whereas on the inverse side, like unlimited truck, etc., that ratio is complete fucking opposite. Like, it's insanely expensive no matter what you do, no matter how many sponsors you have or pretend you have or whatever you want to call it. That's a whole other conversation, the pretending of sponsors. But it's your own money or family money, right? So then what the fuck does it matter? You're doing your own fucking thing. You're beholden to yourself. Whereas if you have a really close tie, you know, a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
So that's what, you know, I envision happening. A lot of guys, my peers, etc., we've had these conversations, and that's why I'm doing what I am specifically doing right now. Whereas I've had offers to manage or build other sorts of platforms, etc., and do things for other families in sort of similar aspects over the years. And I've turned all of that down, other than this specific avenue, because we are going directly to compete against the best. I only want to do it if I compete against the best, and that's what we're building for with our race program. And so that's where I felt my bandwidth would be utilized, or not utilized, but like, okay, now I'll pseudo come out of builder retirement, so to speak, to go down this road. Whereas if you would have asked me like 6 years ago, I'd be like, fuck no, I'm never fucking doing building shit again. This is a fucking nightmare. I hate this. Dealing with suppliers, dealing with employees. Nope. I had my consulting firm and we were doing great, and I did not want to deviate from that. But it's, you know, if you're too competitive or too into racing, at some point you just can't turn away. So like, you got to do something. And so this is my comeback to racing.
It's in your blood.
Yeah, it is. So that's just very fortunate that the avenue I get to do that in now is truly unique per se.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I would definitely love the UTV stuff. Like, I've got a UTV. I may race myself someday, etc. But the advancement in that side too has created a lot of fans out of skeptics. Like, I used to think the UTV stuff was like the gayest stuff ever. Like, this is so dumb. And we used to design so much of it. And then I started going out to more of the races and getting more in depth with some of the racers, and then really understanding like how serious these things were getting. You know, once they were starting to do triple digits and things like that, a different ball game. So I was definitely more of like a UTV skeptic for a long time, and then started to fall in love with them more and more as time progressed. Especially now that the performance of them, especially out of the box, is just ridiculous. So obviously, I'm not, you know, alone in that. In what I'm getting at here is that you've got UTV racing, your few calibers of UTV racing. Those are like the things that are going to be growing rapidly during racing. You've got 6100 and trophy truck. Everything else is kind of going to fall to the wayside. I don't even know anyone building a class 10 anymore. Maybe Lumacraft, maybe. I mean, God forbid you're thinking like class 5s, heavy metals, stuff like that. I mean, these are dinosaur platforms that are just not going to be showing up to races anymore. It's literally going to be UTVs, a few buggies, a few class 1s will still hold on, I think, by default, and then 6100s and trophy truck. That's where off-road racing is going in our lifetime. Unless for some weird fucking shift. But that's where All the new stuff is
they got to add the electric class at some point.
Oh God, yeah. I don't know how well that's going to pan out.
Yeah,
they need some serious advancement.
We went to the Nitro Rallycross, and they have their electric class in there.
Was it the EV?
A bunch of electric.
What's it called?
EV something.
What are they called? They're rally car platforms, right?
Either they're like hatchback looking cars.
Yeah, it's in essence a rally. It's not like an like we're referring to an off-road car. It's a rally car per se.
Yeah, it's a rally car.
Yeah, and so those again, it's rough because there's a lot of benefits to it, but at the same side, like it's really, or at least as a technology now, like the weight that would be required for any real power or endurance of those platforms is insane.
Yeah.
That car would be 10,000 pounds to have the same amount of power and endurance as like an equivalent, fossil fuel based platform. So until they figure that out, like it's really difficult to push the EV stuff because it's just not the same.
It's not the same for the fans. It's not the same for the drivers. I mean, we're sitting back
like
there.
The noise, is that what you're referring to? Like the feeling
these cars like just quietly go by,
Yeah, see, that's weird to me. That's very weird.
I can't do it. You want the popping of the cars and like.
Yeah, and we've done a bunch of design work over the years for these like EV UTV companies. Yeah. We designed several platforms. I can't name them, but I have a lot of experience in that to some degree. And like I'm saying, that is the fundamental ratio that sucks. Like
so same with that type of platform, the UTVs, like it's just way too heavy.
Oh, it's insane.
Yeah.
It is so insane. So like to even get some basic metrics that are awesome, you have like 3,200 pound battery packs for like a 4-seater. Like you're fucked. The car's 5,000 pounds. You know what I mean?
Does that stretch across the whole car, or is that all in the back, or? You probably have to put that weight.
Multiple locations. I don't want to give it. I can't disclose who I've designed platforms for because we're under NDA. But the point being is, there's been multiple versions of that with layouts that we've done. Suspension, motor, things like that. I can talk about my personal car that we deviated some of the design from. I was building. I still have the chassis in my garage. It's a tube chassis Turbo S. 4-seat, but it's all brand new, so like nothing stock. And what I was dabbling with design-wise is like a battery pack that slides into the rear seat section that can be slid out and then replaced. Still like 900 pounds roughly, but it would get you like 30 minutes. We would need like 3,000 pounds more batteries to even do anything consistent. Like you'd only get like 20 miles, 25 miles with any decent power. If you dial the power way back, you might be able to get like 90 miles at like a max of 25 miles an hour.
Yeah, but I mean, nobody wants to buy these things to cruise around.
Yeah, that's my point, is that the fundamental ratio of these EVs, unfortunately, is just not even close to capitalize on what the fossil fuel stuff is. And so maybe we'll get there, but like we really just need significant advancements in the batteries. Because the motors, you can get some really rad motors that are plenty strong enough. I also helped design like a electric hypercar at one point a little while back, a bunch of other stuff like that. So it's just, there's your trade-off. Like you have time consumption, you have power, and then obviously those two you dabble through, and then weight is going to fight you. And so unlike a UTV, like if you're trying to put together an electric UTV that's 5,000 pounds for like a 4-seater, all of your competition is going to be 2,300 pounds, can do almost 100 miles an hour, carry 4 adults. Or like even with what you're doing, like you're at best going to make it 60 miles with 4 adults at 60 miles an hour, maybe.
Yeah.
Like it's just brutal. So I don't know, man. That's a tough sell. Off-road is just so too high of a variable to legitimately like pinpoint like if EVs really even have a future.
I don't know. I mean, look at the SoCal. Just take the SoCal region of off-roaders. Like everybody wants loud-ass motors. They want chop on their motors. They want to drive it. Like if I accelerate my truck compared to like driving a Tesla and accelerating that, it's two different experiences of driving, right?
Yeah.
But it's never going to be like that chop of a motor and like this is a muscle vehicle,
Yeah, and that's not even what I'm referring to. Like that's the whole fuel aspect that again is obviously deteriorated with an electric vehicle in every aspect. And that arguably is partly what people end up spending their money on. Like, that's why they're spending money in that direction. So I like I'm saying, I don't know. I don't know if they have a place in our industry. I'm certainly not going to invest any time or money into that direction. I think if anything, it's going to be like the foo-foo shit where it's like you bought like the electric sick boy UTV that you like drive around your property or whatever, like just because you have it. But like no one's going to be seriously racing those things.
Well, look at the electric dirt bikes. There's been a couple brands they've come and gone. They've lost their businesses.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. Like guys will put it in their garage, go ride it around the trails behind their house because nobody can hear them. But that's as far as it goes. Nobody's on the track. It's changing, but nobody's on the track racing those things because they're not competitive.
No, like when I was at the Mint 400, one thing that did struck me is there was a ton of like fucking like 10-year-olds to like 14-year-olds on those little electric motorcycle things.
The KTMs.
Fucking ripping around.
The KTMs and the Hondas, they're like crazy popular right now.
Yeah, and it's like the equivalent of like the new pit bikes.
Yeah.
Like you see what I'm saying? And those are great for that because you can go dick around for a little bit around the pits or whatever, but like you ain't taking that on like long trail rides.
No.
Yeah. So like that's a good market for it. I just don't know how far we're going to get past that unless the battery stuff significantly changes.
Yeah, I don't know. Stark Vargs. Have you heard of those new dirt bikes?
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are like equivalent of like 88 horsepower if you ran that thing.
Yeah, because the electric motor will have a ton of, like, it's instant torque. Like I'm saying, the motor's not the problem. You can easily get the power. It's the batteries.
Yeah.
And in a bike like that, like, obviously packaging, weight, like, even the little things, like, we have, like, the little fucking Stasics shit for my kids. Those things are insanely powerful for those little
Those things are
bikes.
rad. I'll give that for kids, like, learning how to ride and stuff. Those are really cool.
But even if you turn that fucker full tilt, it's like 10 minutes of riding.
It just dies out, yeah.
They don't have big batteries. Like this and they're already really, like, for a 3-year-old, they're pretty fucking heavy.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? It's a struggle for a 3-year-old to pick that back up after he's fallen like the 8th fucking time. Like, you know what I mean? So that's like a good limitation, or like that's a realistic limitation of where that's at. And those, I don't see those going away. Like for kids and stuff like that, dude, that's fucking perfect.
Yeah, they're actually really popular.
Yeah, yeah. We've got the 12-inch wheel one. Our cousins, my wife's sister, they have the 14, and we get them for my wife's. I think we get them all for free because of like her family bullshit in the motorcycle industry. And so we just started riding them. But you've seen them, right? They're the little battery packs that are on like the fucking
on the frame underneath.
The tools, like there's a term for it now. It's escaping me. But you know what I mean. You could have a backpack of 4 or 5 of those, and so now you've got a few hours of riding time for a kid.
Yeah.
And that's not difficult to do, right? As opposed to trying to stuff something gnarly like in those larger KTMs or Hondas to then get hours and hours of riding time on those is a totally different equation. Yeah.
I don't know. It's an interesting world we're moving into in this next.
Yeah, there's lots that's going to be changing. I think composites, 3D printing, stuff like that is obviously going to make the electrics even more viable, simply because with the design of organic design and printing, we're going to be able to reduce weight, increase robustness, and that's obviously going to cater to adding more battery weight and things like that. So maybe there's some hope for some of the electric stuff as we move forward to some of the other technologies in kind of like unison, but I don't know, man. It's going to be very difficult to replace any of the more hardcore race-based stuff with any of that, at least at the moment. And then the guys that have dabbled, like, for the big fucking truck shit, whether like the electric stuff, like that Brenthel one they did, dude, that was fucking brutal. Those poor guys.
Yeah.
I can't think of the fucking name of the company now. It was like a 4-door truck. They did the score race 2 seasons ago, something like that. Brenthel built the truck.
The Raptor?
No. It was something else. It was a 4-door like electric truck.
Oh, electric truck.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
And they were running that, and that just failed miserably. Like, they clearly did not do their math even remotely close to understanding how much energy consumption is used going through the desert. And that was, it's not Rivian. It might have been Rivian. No, I don't think it was Rivian. Something like that. But that was like the last major thing I saw electric wise. Otherwise, we've had like a few guys convert class 10s to electric, class 1s to electric.
So like some electric UTVs like catching on fire.
Yeah.
It was a show like, I don't know, 6 months ago, maybe it was last year. One of like the off-road shows, they were trying to do like a demo with the electric vehicles, and one of them rolled out of there and it was on fire.
Yeah, that's the other thing people don't understand. Or I think people are understanding that more now as like people keep shit posting all the Tesla fires and stuff like that. But like, these batteries in essence are bombs. Not that like a fuel cell isn't, but the combustion of like gasoline or diesel per se is entirely different than like what a battery is and how a battery would burn or explode in essence. And that's a whole nother level of danger. That's a little bit scarier than like even race fuel,
Yeah.
And so those things are just like asking to get fucked up, especially in like an off-road situation where everything moves, it rattles, shit like that. Way worse than fucking regular car shit. So a Tesla and stuff, even though they're having problems, and other electric vehicles are having problems too, but like, in the off-road circumstance, that's the other caveat is like fire. Fire would scare the fuck out of me. So like even these companies that are building those electric UTVs or starting to, because there's like, these are basically startup firms, other than like, like Polaris is dabbling and CanAm, etc. But these more startup firms trying to do it, like the liability on the backside that's got to be fucking scary. It takes one dude to sue you, X, Y, or Z, you can be in a big, big trouble. And those things for sure are like, I would say there's a higher probability those will catch fire than traditional fossil fuel cars. So there's a whole other avenue that sucks.
Yep. All right. So do you have a YouTube? Don't you that you do stuff on?
Yeah, the YouTube is JEHC. It's fairly straightforward. Jason Elvis Hurd Cast, or however you want to call it. I just put JEHC. Jason Elvis Hurd Consulting is the firm. That's the Instagram is JEH Consulting Inc. That's pretty much where I post primarily my stuff, other than the DIY stuff. I think that's it. Yeah.
Facebook?
I have Facebook, but that's more personal and shit talking than anything else.
Facebook's hard. So hard to get traction on there.
But see, the thing too is like I don't care about traction. Yeah. I'm not too concerned about that stuff because like DIY etc. is all just kind of grown organically or naturally. I invest like absolutely zero time other than posting on Instagram.
Yeah.
But the YouTube stuff I'm doing for fun. That's more educational and to teach other guys stuff that I wish I knew when I was just starting out, or at a minimum, at least someone to fucking help guide me through some of this stuff. And then the race program stuff. Like if you look at our Instagram, that's where we're posting all the new big truck type stuff. So the trophy trucks, the class 1s, all that's on the Instagram. Yeah.
Cool. All right, well, go give Jason a follow on his YouTube and Instagram. Appreciate you coming on, dude.
All good, man. Thank you for having me down.
Yeah, we'll see you guys later.
Take it easy.